Even heroes can fall. She was once the Navy's brightest star, Commander Claire Donovan, a fearless SEAL who broke every limit. But one mission changed everything. A single choice, a single heartbeat, and her team never came home. Branded reckless and sent to exile in the frozen city of Duluth, Claire soon learns her fall was no accident. Beneath the snow lies a network of corruption, and the same men who destroyed her past now want her silenced forever. Yet in the silence of winter, a warrior rises again. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story stirs your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage and redemption. The wind howled across the Alaskan coast, tearing through the frozen air with a ferocity that felt almost human. Anchorage lay beneath a curtain of blizzard and silence, the kind of silence that came after the last bullet had been fired and the dead no longer moved. Commander Claire Donovan stood alone amid the wreckage of a rescue mission gone wrong, her breath fogging the air, her gloved hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the unbearable weight pressing on her chest. Claire was 35, tall and athletic, her figure hardened by years of special operations training. Her dark auburn hair, usually tied tight under her combat helmet, now hung loose against her pale, wind-burned face. Her green-gray eyes, once full of confidence and precision, now carried the dull reflection of the 3 bodies being lifted onto stretchers behind her, each one draped in the same flag she had once sworn to protect. The mission had been simple on paper: extract 5 civilian hostages from a snowbound factory compound seized by armed extremists. But Claire had seen something the others didn't: a structural instability in the north wall, signs of hidden explosives in the ventilation ducts. When command ordered the team to breach through the front, she disobeyed. She rerouted half her squad through the side corridor, believing she could buy time. Instead, the factory went up in fire. 3 of her men never made it out. Now, in the freezing dawn, her superior officer, Commander Nathan Pierce, approached. Pierce was in his 40s, tall but stooped, his square face marked by the faint scars of an old explosion in Kandahar, a scar that had turned his right eyebrow into a permanent frown. He had once been Claire's mentor, the one who vouched for her when few believed a woman could lead a SEAL team. His voice now was brittle with restrained fury. "Do you understand what you've done, Claire?" he asked, his breath a plume of frost between them. "I did what I had to do," she replied quietly, her voice hoarse, almost breaking. "You disobeyed direct orders. You cost 3 lives. I saved the hostages," she said, looking him straight in the eyes. "And if I hadn't, all 8 would be dead." Pierce stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled heavily. "You think saving civilians justifies losing soldiers? You think command will see it that way?" Claire didn't answer. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew the truth. The system didn't care for nuance. It only counted bodies and obedience. When the transport helicopters departed, she stood alone on the runway as the storm thickened around her. Snow clung to her uniform like ash. The radio crackled in her ear with an incoming directive, one that would change everything. She was to return to base immediately for disciplinary review. Days later, at the Naval Tribunal in San Diego, she faced a panel of gray uniforms and colder faces. At the center sat Admiral Malcolm Hargrove, the decorated head of the Special Warfare Council. He was 62, short and compact, his hair silver and perfectly combed, his jaw sharp as his metals. His eyes, steel blue and unblinking, studied her like an insect under glass. Hargrove was a man born from order and ambition, one who believed emotion was a weakness that had no place in warfare. Rumor whispered he had never once lost a political duel in his career. "Commander Donovan," Hargrove said, his tone calm yet heavy with calculated disdain. "3 of your men died under your command because you chose to disregard a lawful order. Is that correct?" Claire straightened in her chair. "Yes, sir, but There is no but in combat," Hargrove interrupted. "Discipline is what keeps men alive. You broke that chain." "With respect, sir," Claire replied, her voice firming despite the tremor inside her. "The mission plan was compromised. The intel didn't match the reality on the ground. If I had followed orders, then you would have died with them," Hargrove snapped. "And perhaps that would have been easier to explain to their families." The words struck like shrapnel. For a moment, Claire felt her composure crack, her nails digging into her palms beneath the table. Behind her calm expression was a storm of guilt and defiance. She could still hear their last screams in her headset, the chaos, the explosion, the silence that followed. No tribunal could punish her more than that sound already did. The decision was swift and merciless. Claire Donovan was to be reassigned, effective immediately, to a remote command under Hargrove's oversight, the Duluth Winter Warfare Training Facility in Minnesota. Officially, it was described as a disciplinary reintegration post. Unofficially, it was exile. Outside the tribunal room, she found Lieutenant Sarah Keene, one of the administrative aides who had worked with her on previous missions. Sarah was 28, slender, with freckled skin and a nervous smile. She handed Claire her new deployment orders, her voice low with sympathy. "I heard what happened. For what it's worth, some of us know the truth wasn't that simple." Claire gave a tired nod. Truth never is. That night, as her plane descended into the endless white of Minnesota's winter, she stared out the window. Snow stretched for miles like a sheet of unbroken silence. The reflection of her face in the glass looked like that of a stranger, a soldier stripped of rank, reputation, and purpose. But beneath the exhaustion, a spark still burned. Something in her refused to yield. The Duluth facility was smaller than she'd imagined, a cluster of concrete and steel buried under snowdrifts, its floodlights glowing faintly in the storm. Waiting at the airstrip was Colonel Ryan Kruger, the base commander. He was in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed in a dark parka, his silver beard trimmed to military precision. His handshake was cold, his smile colder. "Welcome to Duluth, Commander. Out here we believe in redemption through obedience." "I've had enough of redemption speeches, Colonel," Claire replied dryly. Kruger's grin widened a fraction. "Then I suggest you start believing in silence instead." As she followed him through the corridors, the hum of generators filled the air like a mechanical heartbeat. Faces turned to watch her, curious, hostile, or indifferent. Word had already spread, the fallen SEAL who disobeyed orders. In the cafeteria, conversation halted when she passed. The isolation was immediate and complete. That night, alone in her quarters, Claire unpacked her duffel bag and stared at the old photograph she kept tucked inside. A picture of her and her team before the Anchorage mission, smiling in the snow. She brushed a gloved thumb over their faces. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I won't let them bury you, or me." Outside, the storm raged louder, as if the wind itself carried secrets. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow watched the barracks lights flicker, then vanished into the white. The cold in Duluth was different. It didn't sting. It crept. It crawled under the skin, and made a home in the bones. For Commander Claire Donovan, the cold was both punishment and disguise. Weeks had passed since her reassignment, but the whispers hadn't stopped. Around the training yard, in the cafeteria, in the armory, everywhere she walked, silence followed. The men called her the ghost from Anchorage. She ignored them all. Colonel Ryan Kruger, the commanding officer, had made his position clear from day one. He was a man who believed authority was maintained through fear, not respect. His uniform was always immaculate, his silver beard trimmed to a cruel perfection. He wore power the way other men wore warmth. "You're here because of failure," he had told Claire during her first week. "Remember that every time you salute." Kruger had the kind of composure that made people uneasy, the calm of a man who could smile while tightening a noose. The Duluth facility operated like a machine. Rigid schedules, long drills, and constant surveillance. The snow never melted. It simply changed shape. The air was sharp enough to cut glass, but beneath the surface of this discipline, something darker pulsed. Claire began noticing patterns. Documents she'd filed suddenly missing from the records. Her assigned locker left slightly ajar. A faint click on the radio whenever she spoke during night patrols. Once, during a live-fire exercise, her rifle jammed. The safety pin had been filed down, deliberately. One evening, after another 12-hour drill, she found a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was angular and clean. "You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late." There was no signature. She folded it once and tucked it into her pocket without reaction. Fear was exactly what they wanted. Her roommate, Sergeant Dana Rourke, noticed her silence but didn't ask questions. Dana was a stocky woman in her early 40s, with dark skin and cropped hair peppered with gray. Her voice had the raspy edge of someone who had smoked through half her service. A veteran of multiple tours in Afghanistan, Dana carried herself with weary pragmatism. "This place eats people," she muttered one night, lacing her boots. "Don't let it know you taste good." Claire gave a faint smile but said nothing. Colonel Kruger's assistant, Lieutenant Paul Mercer, was another presence Claire had learned to read carefully. He was in his early 30s, blonde, clean-shaven, with a grin too quick and a gaze that lingered too long. His politeness was rehearsed, his loyalty performative. Whenever Kruger reprimanded Claire publicly, Mercer's smirk was always nearby. He had a habit of being exactly where he shouldn't be, outside her quarters, in restricted corridors, pretending to be just passing through. It was on one of those frozen nights, when the snow fell thick as ash, that Claire met Eli Ward. She was in the Eastern Communications Wing, checking on a system malfunction that had cut off several channels from the outer patrols. The room was dimly lit, humming with static. Among the cables and flickering monitors, a tall man knelt beside an open terminal. Eli looked up, startled, a wrench in one hand. He was in his late 30s, lean, with sandy hair that curled slightly at the ends, and a short beard that gave him a rugged, distracted look. His eyes were a deep blue, sharp yet tired, like someone who'd seen too much and learned to stop talking about it. His left hand trembled faintly, a tremor that hinted at old nerve damage. "You must be the commander," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "The one everyone's whispering about." "I suppose that depends on what they're whispering," Claire replied, crossing her arms. "Mostly that you're cursed," he said, standing. Which in this place might actually be a compliment. He introduced himself as Eli Ward, a signal engineer contracted by the Navy, but with a past he didn't advertise. The faint scars along his temple and the way he scanned the room before speaking told her everything she needed to know. CIA fieldwork, technical ops, maybe infiltration support. This system failure, she said, nodding to the console. Routine or deliberate? Eli hesitated. That depends on who you think the enemy is. His tone was mild, but his eyes flicked toward the ceiling cameras, then back to her. Claire caught the message. He returned to his work, whispering low enough for the sound of static to swallow his words. Something's off here. Logs don't match transmissions. Half the system reports to an address that doesn't exist on the Navy grid. Someone's rerouting internal data. Could be a training algorithm, Claire said softly, though she didn't believe it. Could be, Eli agreed. But the signature codes trace back to Kruger's personal command terminal. Claire's pulse quickened, but her expression didn't change. You're sure? Sure enough that I stopped sleeping. He replaced the panel, stood, and gave her a cautious look. You didn't hear it from me. But if you start getting too many accidents, remember, it's not bad luck. It's design. Then he walked out into the snow, his figure fading into the white. The next morning, Claire's training schedule was suddenly modified. Kruger announced a new round of endurance drills, 72 hours of survival exercises in sub-zero conditions. A true test of resilience, he called it. Claire recognized the tactic. Exhaustion as punishment. Halfway through the first day, one of the recruits collapsed from frostbite, his glove soaked in blood. Claire ordered the team to halt and build shelter, but Mercer overrode her with Kruger's written directive. No halts until rotation complete. She stared at the note, then at the young soldier shivering on the ground. Without hesitation, she carried him herself to the medic station. Later, she found her performance report downgraded for insubordination. That night, the base was quiet except for the groan of wind against steel. Claire sat at her desk, staring at the note from under her door and Eli's words echoing in her mind. Not bad luck. Design. She logged into her encrypted terminal, bypassing the facility's mainframe through a hidden access route she'd used during her SEAL days. Within minutes, she found it. The unauthorized relay network embedded in Kruger's command line. The files were masked behind coded names, but one phrase repeated across them. Snow Veil. She didn't know what it meant, but her instincts told her it wasn't training. Before she could go further, a soft knock came at her door. When she opened it, no one was there. Only a single object lay in the snow, a spent bullet casing, polished clean, engraved with her initials. Inside her room, she sat still for a long time, the storm roaring outside like something alive. The walls seemed to hum with secrets, and for the first time, she realized Duluth wasn't just a punishment post. It was a trap, and she was walking straight into its center. The sun never truly rose in Duluth that winter. It only struggled weakly through the clouds, pale and colorless, before sinking again into the endless white. Inside the base, drills continued without pause, the soldiers moving like ghosts through the fog. For Commander Claire Donovan, the cold no longer stung. It simply became part of her skin, another layer of armor between her and the world that wanted her erased. The bullet casing with her initials still lay in her locker, a silent reminder that someone in the base wanted her gone, but not yet dead. The week began with new orders from Colonel Ryan Kruger, a full-scale terrorist pursuit simulation to test the readiness of all units. Claire's instincts warned her immediately. This kind of exercise, announced suddenly and involving live combat parameters, was never a good sign. Kruger stood before the assembled teams in the main hangar, his tall frame cutting a severe figure against the floodlights. His breath fogged in the frozen air, his voice sharp and deliberate. Today's simulation will separate soldiers from liabilities. Real-time tracking, full-gear operation, and zero tolerance for hesitation. Fail, and you're out. Beside him, Lieutenant Paul Mercer smirked as he distributed the mission briefings. His gloved fingers tapped on each folder like a judge handing out sentences. Claire accepted hers wordlessly, her green-gray eyes locking briefly with Kruger's. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile predators wear before they pounce. The operation began at 0700 hours. The target was a hostile cell embedded in an abandoned mining complex 10 miles from the base. The goal was to capture or neutralize. But within the first 10 minutes, something was off. The security perimeter engaged real mines, not simulated sensors. Explosions echoed through the valley, their shockwaves too strong to be training grade. "Hold positions!" Claire shouted, diving behind a snowbank as shrapnel tore through the air. Her team of 6 recruits froze, unsure if this was still part of the test. The youngest, Private Nolan Briggs, only 22, pale-skinned and trembling, looked ready to run. "Stay low, Briggs," Claire barked. "This isn't a drill." Her radio hissed to life, Eli's voice cutting through static. "Claire, this isn't simulation code. The system's been hijacked. Someone's feeding live ammunition protocols into the grid. Get your people out of there." "How bad?" she asked, scanning the tree line. "Bad enough that someone wants casualties," Eli replied. His tone was controlled, but underneath was the unmistakable edge of panic. Before she could respond, a second explosion ripped through the ice ridge behind them. Snow and smoke filled the air. One of her recruits screamed. Briggs had been thrown backward, his leg caught under debris. Without thinking, Claire sprinted into the blast zone, her boots crunching through the thin crust of snow. She ignored the pain in her shoulder as she heaved the slab off him, dragging the young man to cover. His face was bloodless, his lips trembling. "You're okay," she said firmly, pressing a tourniquet to his thigh. "Stay awake. Look at me, Briggs." Above them, the alarms of the base wailed through the mountains. By the time rescue teams arrived, Claire had led her squad to safety through a drainage tunnel that she discovered on an old facility map, a route not even listed in the new system. Her ability to navigate chaos once again saved lives, and just like Anchorage, it earned her more resentment than gratitude. Back at the command center, Colonel Kruger paced before the operations screen, his face unreadable but his tone like a whip. "Explain yourself, Commander. Who authorized your deviation from the extraction route?" Claire stood at attention, her uniform torn, soot staining her face. "Sir, the designated path was compromised. Real munitions were deployed." "Impossible!" Kruger snapped. "The simulation protocols were sealed. Any suggestion otherwise implies sabotage from within. Are you accusing my officers of treason?" "No, sir," she said evenly. "But someone wanted this exercise to turn lethal." Lieutenant Mercer interjected smoothly, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe Commander Donovan's trauma from Anchorage is causing her to misread data again." The smirk on his lips was enough to make Claire's fists tighten, but she said nothing. Then Eli Ward entered, holding a portable drive and looking more disheveled than usual. His sandy hair was wind-tossed, and the circles under his eyes had deepened since the last time she'd seen him. "I can confirm her report," he said. The safety override was manually disabled. Logs showed direct command-level access. Kruger turned, voice low and dangerous. "Are you implying I ordered this?" "I'm implying someone with your clearance did," Eli replied calmly. The two men locked eyes for several long seconds. The room fell silent except for the hum of the monitors. Later, Claire found Eli in the lower communications lab. He sat in front of a row of monitors, lines of code flickering across the glass. The bluish glow reflected in his tired eyes. "You just painted a target on your back," she said. He gave a humorless laugh. "If they wanted me gone, they'd have done it already. I'm too useful to delete, at least for now." "What did you find?" she asked, stepping closer. Eli inserted a drive into the terminal. "The project I told you about, Snow Veil. It's not just a name. It's a logistics pipeline. Unmarked cargo shipments moving through Navy supply routes, labeled as cold-weather survival equipment. But inside? Weapons. High-tech prototypes, mostly experimental small arms, some AI-guided drones. Someone's using this base as a front." Claire's brow furrowed. "And Kruger? He signs off on the transfers, but I think he's middle management. The real authorization codes come from higher, Pentagon-level clearance. So this isn't just corruption," she said slowly. "It's an operation." "Exactly," Eli nodded. "And Anchorage, your mission?" "I found fragments of the comm logs. The bomb trigger that killed your men. It was linked remotely through a Snow Veil encrypted channel. You were never supposed to succeed." The revelation hit her like a blade sliding between ribs. All this time she had carried the guilt of Anchorage like a scar branded on her soul. Now she saw it for what it was, a setup. Someone had needed a scapegoat. Her defiance back then had made her the perfect candidate. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "They killed my team, to bury their trail." Eli looked up at her, the faint tremor in his left hand returning. "And now they'll try to bury you the same way." A sudden knock at the lab door made them both freeze. Eli killed the monitor and slid the drive into his pocket. The door opened. Lieutenant Mercer stood there, his grin sharp as ever. "Commander, Colonel Kruger wants to see you, alone." His eyes flicked briefly toward Eli, the faintest hint of suspicion there. "I'll be right there," Claire said coolly. When Mercer left, Eli exhaled. "They're tightening the noose. You need to play dumb until we can trace the full chain." "I've played dumb long enough," she said. "If Snow Veil runs through this base, I'll tear it out by the roots." As she walked out into the corridor, the snow outside thickened, blanketing the base in white silence. High above, spotlights flickered through the storm, their beams swallowed by the fog. Claire knew one thing now. The ghosts that haunted Anchorage had names, ranks, and clearance badges, and she was coming for them. The storm over Duluth had not stopped for 3 days. Wind tore through the compound, rattling the metal frames of the barracks, and snow slashed across the floodlights like static on a broken screen. Inside the command headquarters, Commander Claire Donovan sat handcuffed at a steel table, her wrists raw against the cuffs, a single strip of fluorescent light humming above her. The room smelled of iron and cold dust. She had been awake for almost 30 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Anchorage, the flash of the explosion, the screams, and now the face of Admiral Hargrove behind it all. Across from her stood Colonel Ryan Kruger, his coat still flecked with snow. His silver beard was damp, his eyes colder than the blizzard outside. "You've overstepped every boundary, Commander," he said quietly, though his voice carried the steel of authority. Unauthorized access, data theft, conspiracy. You think your name still means something in this place? Claire's voice was low but steady. My name means nothing, but the truth still does. Kruger chuckled, a sound without humor. Truth? In this business, truth's whatever we decide it is. He turned to Lieutenant Paul Mercer, who stood by the door, arms crossed, smugness dripping from every line of his posture. Prepare the transfer order, Kruger said. Commander Donovan is to be detained at Black Ridge Detention Facility until further directive from Naval Intelligence. Mercer nodded, tapping on his digital tablet. He was always immaculate. Short blonde hair, clean-shaven jaw, uniform pressed to perfection. But there was something serpentine about the way he moved. He had the practiced confidence of a man who thought himself untouchable. Before Kruger could continue, the door slammed open. The gust of freezing wind that followed carried in a tall figure in a dark overcoat, snow clinging to his shoulders. Admiral Malcolm Hargrove had arrived. His entrance froze the room more effectively than the weather. At 62, he looked as though he had been carved from granite. Compact, hard, and coldly precise. His medals gleamed against his chest, symbols of a lifetime of manipulation disguised as duty. His piercing blue eyes flicked over Claire, then to Kruger. I'll handle this personally, he said. Kruger straightened instantly, stepping aside like a subordinate in the presence of a god. Admiral, it's an honor. Spare me the ceremony, Hargrove interrupted. His gaze locked onto Claire, studying her the way a scientist might observe a specimen. Commander Donovan, I had hoped your exile here would humble you. Instead, it seems you've developed a taste for insubordination. Claire's expression didn't waver. I learned from the best, sir. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. You've been accessing classified intelligence under restricted protocols. Files tied to Operation Snow Veil. Care to explain why? Because they belong to my team, she said, her voice rising for the first time. Because I wanted to know why they died while you kept getting promoted. The silence in the room grew heavier than the snow outside. Hargrove's lips curved in a faint, dangerous smile. You have no proof. At that moment, the side door opened, and Eli Ward was shoved inside by 2 armed guards. He was pale from blood loss, a bruise spreading across his cheek, his left arm restrained in a sling. His sandy hair was damp, his eyes blazing despite his exhaustion. She has proof, he said, and so do I. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. Who authorized his presence? Kruger hesitated. Sir, he was found near the communications server with your access codes. Eli cut in, his voice hoarse but defiant. I traced the Snow Veil shipments. They lead back to your personal authorization, Admiral. Every illegal transfer, every ghost manifest. You signed it all. Enough, Hargrove barked, slamming his gloved hand on the table. You're a contractor, Mr. Ward, not a soldier. You have no authority here. Eli gave a weak smile. Neither do criminals. Mercer stepped forward, drawing his sidearm. He's lying. We can't allow this nonsense to continue. But before he could act, Claire spoke, calm but sharp. You want evidence? Fine. She reached into the inside pocket of her uniform and withdrew a small data drive, tossing it onto the table. That's a mirrored archive of Snow Veil's encrypted logs. Everything Eli and I recovered before you scrubbed the servers. Dates, shipment numbers, payment chains, and your digital signature on every line. Kruger's face turned a shade paler. This is impossible, he muttered. You're bluffing. Hargrove glanced at the drive but didn't move to pick it up. His jaw tightened. You think a desperate woman and a broken technician can undo decades of work. I built this system, Commander. Every man in this room owes his career to me. Then they can watch you fall with it, Claire replied. The Admiral's composure finally cracked. He turned sharply to Kruger. End this. Kruger hesitated for only a second before drawing his weapon. The moment stretched like a wire ready to snap. Claire didn't flinch, but Eli stepped between them instinctively. The gunshot echoed like thunder against the steel walls. Eli staggered backward, the bullet tearing through his shoulder. The guards shouted, confusion rippling through the room. "Hold your fire!" someone yelled. It was Sergeant Dana Rourke, who had entered moments earlier with a security team. Her dark eyes widened as she saw Eli collapse, blood blooming across his jacket. She raised her rifle but pointed it, not at Claire, but at Kruger. "Put it down, sir." Kruger froze. Around him, other soldiers hesitated. Some lowered their weapons, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Claire knelt beside Eli, pressing her hand against the wound. He gritted his teeth, his face ashen. Still, not dead yet, he managed through a strained smile. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows like fists. Claire looked up at the crowd of soldiers now surrounding the table. "You all know what's in that drive," she said, her voice steady despite the blood at her fingertips. "Every lie, every life lost to cover someone else's ambition. You can stand with him, or you can stand with the truth." The hesitation broke. One by one, rifles turned, not toward Claire, but toward Kruger and Hargrove. The Admiral's face drained of color as the realization dawned. "You fools," he spat. "You have no idea who you're defying." "Maybe not," Dana said coldly. "But we've seen enough to know who we shouldn't be following." Claire rose, the drive still in her hand. "Admiral Malcolm Hargrove, you're under arrest for corruption, treason, and the deaths of American soldiers." Hargrove's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, 2 guards stepped forward, disarming him. Snow blew through the cracked doorway, scattering across the floor like ashes. The storm outside had begun to calm, but inside the base, the air still burned. Claire turned to Eli, who was barely conscious. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice softer than she intended. Eli gave a faint smirk. "Told you, you'd need me." As medics rushed in and soldiers led Hargrove away in handcuffs, Claire looked out through the window. The night sky was breaking apart, pale light piercing the clouds. The storm was ending, but she knew the war was far from over. The sun rose over Duluth for the first time in weeks, spilling light across the frozen compound, like gold poured over steel. The storm had passed, but the scars it left were carved deep, into the land, into the people, and into Commander Claire Donovan herself. She stood at the edge of the airstrip, the wind brushing against her uniform, the same uniform she had once worn as a prisoner of accusation and now bore as a symbol of vindication. Her green-gray eyes reflected both the brightness of morning and the weight of memory. She had survived, but survival was not the same as peace. The Naval Intelligence Convoy had left before dawn, carrying Admiral Malcolm Hargrove in shackles and silence. His arrest had sent tremors through the military hierarchy, exposing a network of officials who had hidden behind medals and bureaucracy. The Snowvale Project was dismantled, its encrypted channels purged, its operatives scattered. The Navy called it containment. Claire knew better. It was justice, yes, but justice arrived too late for the men lost in Anchorage, and for the soldiers buried by lies. Inside the infirmary, Eli Ward sat upright in a white cot, his shoulder wrapped in clean bandages. The faint smell of antiseptic mingled with the sharp chill sneaking through the windows. He looked weaker than before, but his eyes, clear blue and sharp as winter glass, still carried that spark of quiet defiance. He was dressed in civilian clothing now, a dark sweater, worn jeans, and an old leather jacket with a torn collar. A man ready to disappear again. Claire entered quietly. The rhythmic click of her boots on the tile floor broke the silence. "They're transferring you today," she said softly. Eli smiled, the kind that only half reached his eyes. "You make it sound like I'm going on vacation." "You're lucky to be alive." "Lucky's not the word I'd use," he murmured, adjusting his sling. "I'm heading south. Some intel boys want me debriefed at Langley. Probably lock me in a room, ask me how I managed to survive this long without becoming one of them." She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "You'll tell them the truth?" Eli chuckled. "And ruin the myth? Never. Let them think the ghosts of Anchorage finished the job." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the heater filled the room. Then Eli reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a small object, a silver seal insignia, worn smooth with age, the trident edges dulled by time. He held it out to her. "This belonged to my old CO. He said it wasn't the metal that made it worth something. It was the man, or woman, who still fought for what it meant." Claire frowned slightly. "You're giving me your past?" He smiled faintly. "No, I'm giving you what you've already earned. You don't need rank or permission, Commander. You're the reason the title still means something." She looked down at the insignia, its surface catching the morning light. Words failed her. When she finally looked up, Eli was watching her with that same steady calm that had both infuriated and saved her. "Goodbye, Eli," she said quietly. "Don't make it sound final," he replied. "Men like me have a bad habit of showing up when you least expect it." Hours later, Claire stood outside as the transport helicopter lifted off. Snow swirled around the landing pad, glinting like fragments of glass in the dawn light. Eli sat inside, staring out the open door, one hand raised in a brief salute before the aircraft disappeared into the clouds. The sound faded, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the rhythmic beat of her heart. A year passed. The seasons shifted, though Duluth never truly thawed. The snow remained, a white armor over the ground, soft but unyielding. The once shadowed base was now alive with new recruits, their boots crunching through frost, their laughter echoing across the training fields. Under the new flag of the Winter Valor Program, Commander Claire Donovan had become the director, hand-picked by Naval Command to train the next generation of soldiers, men and women alike, molded not by politics, but by integrity. She watched them from the edge of the field, her posture straight, her expression thoughtful. The trainees moved through the drills with precision, their breaths clouding in the icy air. A young woman among them, Lieutenant Hannah Ross, 25, tall and wiry, with short-cropped blonde hair and a scar running along her jaw, caught Claire's attention. Hannah reminded her of herself years ago, determined, sharp, and unafraid to break rules for the right reasons. When the whistle blew, Claire called her over. "Lieutenant Ross," she said, her tone neutral but curious. "You were a logistics officer before this, weren't you?" "Yes, ma'am," Hannah replied, standing at attention. Her voice carried the rasp of someone who had seen too much too soon. 2 years in procurement, transferred here after I spoke up about missing supply manifests." Claire nodded slowly. "Good. You'll fit in here. Hannah hesitated, then asked, "Is it true, ma'am? About the old commander here? The one who uncovered Snowvale?" Claire's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sky bled into pale blue over the snow. "Rumors are half the truth. The rest you earn for yourself." When Hannah left, Claire remained, the wind tugging at her coat. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the old seal insignia Eli had given her. The silver trident gleamed faintly against her glove, reflecting the sunrise. She pinned it inside her jacket, over her heart. Later that evening, she stood alone on the firing range. The world around her was silent except for the low whistle of wind between the fences. She drew her sidearm, aimed at a rusted target downrange, and fired once. The shot rang out across the snow, clean and sharp. For the first time since Anchorage, she didn't see blood or fire behind her eyelids, only light. As she holstered her weapon, a golden glow spread over the horizon. The dawn stretched higher, washing the base in soft amber light. Around her, the snow glittered like scattered stars. Claire closed her eyes, feeling the warmth on her face. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of a helicopter rumbled faintly through the sky. Whether it was memory or something more, she couldn't tell. But she smiled, faintly and for real this time. The ghosts of her past no longer haunted her. They watched, quietly, as she forged something new. And under the rising sun of Duluth, Commander Claire Donovan stood not as the woman who survived, but as the one who rebuilt.